Welcome. This is the USU Statesman. Today we are interviewing Chris Peterson, and we'll be asking him some questions and things college students want to know. So our first question is, what motivated your decision to run for office?
Well, as I look around the state, I feel that too many Utahns are being left behind and that our policies are oftentimes directed towards the benefit of privileged insiders and party elites, and that we need to refocus our government on listening to ordinary working people across the state on things like access to health care, affordable education and public school funding, affordable housing, and creating good jobs that are not just jobs, but are actually careers that people can build on. And also reasonable consumer protections and safeguards in the marketplace. And more recently, I think it's very important that we get this coronavirus crisis under control, get the virus to stop spreading, and get our economy back on track.
Absolutely. You said you were a lawyer. You teach law school, correct?
Yeah, I'm a professor at the law school at the University of Utah. I'm an attorney, but I also teach. I'm teaching classes this semester. I worked in the federal government as well. After the financial crash in 2008, I was recruited to go back and help set up a new consumer protection agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB. Think of it as like a little bit like the FBI, except focused on trying to make sure our mortgage loans, our credit cards, bank accounts, and other kinds of financial products are safe and fair. And I helped build a team of attorneys that brought law enforcement cases against banks and debt collectors and mortgage brokers that had broken the law. And our team managed to return over $12 billion in refunds and restitution to about 10% of the adult population of America, all across this country. And I'm very proud to be standing on the side of ordinary working people and trying to make sure that their financial products are safe. I also worked at the Department of Defense, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The Pentagon hired me to help lead their efforts to make sure that our military service members aren't ripped off by predatory loans. And I'm very proud that the Secretary of Defense gave me an award for helping craft the rules that now make it illegal for payday loans, predatory payday loans, to be offered to any soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine all across America.
All right, that's great. The second question is kind of a get to know you question. Utah's known for its soda shops. What is your go-to drink?
My go-to drink. I kind of like sparkling water with a slice of lemon in it. I'm trying to keep it. I'm getting older. I'm trying to keep the sugar down.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
Yeah.
Our next question is about COVID-19. How well do you think Utah has done in responding to COVID-19, and what do we need to do in the future?
Sadly, our government has not done a great job. The public's doing a bit better. We have relatively low fatality rates because our population is pretty young in comparison to many other states, and we're a little bit more fit and healthy than some states. So that's serving us well. But I see some real challenges in the response of the federal and the state government. At the federal level, there was some misleading information. There was denial that it was a problem. The federal government pretended that it was just going to go away, and of course it hasn't. The virus has now killed nearly 200,000 people. That's more Americans than died in World War I, and more Americans that have died in every combat operation since World War II, including the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, and all the Middle Eastern wars combined. It's not the most dangerous virus we've ever seen, but it is a dangerous virus for many people. And it's not just whether or not people die, it's also is leaving many people with long-term scarring in their lungs and heart damage. And that may go on it may change people's lives even if they survive for the rest of their life. So it's very important that we do everything that we reasonably can to get the virus under control. Some of the challenges I've seen, I believe that the state government should have adopted a statewide mask mandate with some reasonable exceptions for people who may have medical conditions that where masks don't work, or for little babies, or people that are outside and are not close to anyone. No one's saying that you should have to wear a mask if you're a farmer in the middle of 30 acres all by yourself. But many states around the country have done this, and virtually every country that's been really successful at getting the virus under control has used masks as a critical feature of their strategy. Also, second, I believe that we have not done a good job at getting testing in place that has short turnaround times. It's critical that people who suspect that they may have a virus, or maybe in a situation where they're in contact with others, can get quick access to results on coronavirus tests. We're still seeing delays in test processing, even though we've been at this for 7 months. Third, we don't have the sufficient contact tracing resources in place. So when somebody does test positive, we can track back and figure out who they have been in contact with and identify who needs to be tested and maybe quarantined to make sure that they don't continue to pass on the disease to others. I believe we need to get those test processing times down to no more than 24 hours, and we should either triple or even quadruple the number of contact tracers that are available. And then finally, I'm very disturbed that this far into the crisis, we still don't have widespread availability of the best protective equipment, including especially N95 masks. N95 masks are respirators, filter out most forms of the virus, and if they have a tight seal around your face, can provide good protection for yourself and for others. Cloth masks are better than nothing, as are surgical masks, but the best protection are N95 masks. There are some more, KN95 masks, some of which may be counterfeit and are a little bit more difficult to breathe through. That we should have widespread availability for all of our frontline workers, our teachers, our bus drivers, our restaurant servers, the folks that are working at the meat packing plant in Hiram, just down the street from Utah State University. All of these workers, and including public school teachers, should have the best available protections, and they still don't. And that's at first the federal government's responsibility, but it's also now the state government's responsibility, since the federal government has failed. If I'm elected, I will do a better job at controlling that supply chain, taking the steps that we need to get protections in place to slow the spread of this virus and get our economy back on track.
Absolutely. What are you doing now, and what will you do in your position to combat climate change?
I believe long-term climate change is the greatest challenge that your generation is facing, and as well as my own. And I am trying to, in my own life, limit my expenditures of greenhouse gases. And frankly, it's one of the reasons that I'm running for governor, to try to elevate the profile of this serious climate crisis that we're facing, that's likely to create refugees. The Department of Defense now views this, the Pentagon views this as the most serious national security risk facing America, because as more and more countries become uninhabitable because of increasing temperature and humidity, and as many of the largest cities in the world start to go underwater as sea levels rise with the retreating ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica and other places around the world, it's going to create millions and millions of refugees that won't have somewhere to go. It's going to put pressure on our food production networks. Just looking here in Utah alone, many climate scientists are predicting that Utah's snowpack may start to decline and dwindle to maybe virtually nothing in the coming 20 to 40 years. Recall that in our state, 80% of our water is used by our agricultural industry. And if 80% of the water in the mountains declines because we don't have a snowpack, it's going to wipe out our skiing industry and our agricultural industry at the same time. It'll create enormous challenges for us in having jobs for our growing population in this state. We're looking at millions more people moving into the state and growing and being raised up in the state, but declining a job base for for them. So this has implications far afield and here at home. We've got to start to do our part in the state to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions. Some things that I believe that we should do. First off, we need to quickly start to transition to hybrid plug-in and electric vehicles. We need to start to replace our commercial fossil fuel electricity generating industries with rooftop solar in our residences, businesses, and in government locations. I'd love to see solar power panels on top of all of our public schools in this state. That's something that I'd like to focus on in my administration. And also, we need to make sure that we have the storage in place to make sure that when the rain isn't, or sorry, when the sun isn't shining, we still have some energy saved up in our homes and businesses. And we also should be looking for commercial solar, wind, and we have the third largest untapped geothermal energy reserves of any state in the country right here in Utah. Geothermal energy is clean, it's consistent because it's available whether it rains or it shines. We need to be focusing on that. And then, long term, we need to get back in the internationally, we need to be cooperating with other countries around the world to make sure that America is doing its part to try to deal with climate change. Last thing I'll mention, climate change is coming whether we like it or not, and Utah by itself doesn't have the power to stop it. We can be a leader. I think that we need to prepare our economy to respond to the challenge of climate change by being a leader in some of those green energy technologies that I believe are likely to start to have significant demand around the world. Let's figure out how to make the most efficient solar power plants and wind plants and geothermal energy, and then sell that technology and develop our businesses and green energy jobs right here at home today to prepare our economy for the future.
All right. Along those lines, what do you think about potentially having nuclear energy?
I think that nuclear energy is it's a tempting option because it doesn't contribute to global warming or greenhouse gases and climate change in the same way. One of the challenges is that leftover nuclear waste has to go somewhere, and it's toxic. And we've seen some of the real tragedies with nuclear energy in the Fukushima nuclear disaster, following the tsunami in Japan, and then of course also in Russia at Chernobyl. And the more nuclear power plants we develop, the more chance of that kind of thing occurring again. And also with respect to the stored nuclear waste, we have several companies that are trying to increase the nuclear waste storage from other countries right here at home in Utah. I believe that that's going to create a long-term legacy of social problems for us, ecological problems, for the short-term benefit of a handful of private interests that are profiting off of it. So I'm reluctant to take on the long-term legacy of nuclear power. I will say, though, that if the climate crisis gets to be too severe, one thing that I would be willing to consider is nuclear-powered carbon sequestration. There are engineers that are developing ways to pull in carbon out of the atmosphere and store it underground, but it takes a lot of energy to do it. Ideally, that would be solar and wind power, but if the climate crisis, if we don't start to get our hands around that, it may become so severe that we are making choices between equally bad alternatives. For our normal power needs, we should be focusing on conservation, trying to decrease, trying to change our building codes to make sure that we've got energy efficient buildings, and trying to use the best available sources of clean renewable energy.
That's great. I agree.
Great. Thank you. Good. Hope I got your vote.
So what music, podcasts, or audiobooks have you been listening to recently?
Oh, what a great question. Well, I have really broad and eclectic interests in music, and it kind of depends on my mood. I like rock and roll. I like rap a little bit. Some of it is a little too much for me, perhaps. When I was a kid, I really enjoyed punk music, and I like country western and folk music, and I really love classical music. And I guess I'm getting old and stuffy because these days I actually also really enjoy opera, but I'm a little embarrassed to admit it because that seems a little stuffy to me. Lately, what have lately I've been listening to a little bit of opera lately. Some Puccini is what I've been listening to. And I also read a lot. I like books a lot. Sometimes I read really serious books, and then sometimes I'll alternate serious book with like a book that I just enjoy. The serious book I've been reading lately is a biography of the Civil War general Ulysses Grant. He was a grinding, tough general that took a difficult situation, and even though he was coming from behind, he managed to overcome it. And I thought that there was something inspirational there for me in my gubernatorial race about being tough, not backing down, and fighting for the things that I believe in. So that's what I've been listening to lately.
That sounds like a really interesting book.
Kelly, I believe I can't hear you there. I lost the sound.
Is it back?
I can just barely hear you there. I wonder if it's on my end.
Oh, weird. Okay, I'll try and talk loud. Is this okay?
Yeah, I've turned you all the way up to 100, so hopefully we'll be able to sort it out.
Okay. Hopefully it fixes itself because I don't know what's going on. So the next question. Sorry. How will you represent Utah's large college student population?
Sure, great question. So first off, I'd like to say that first off, I'm a university professor, a college professor. I teach law school, and I've dedicated my life, most of my life, to trying to be a mentor and a good teacher to try to help launch young law students on their careers as attorneys. I'm really proud of my track record on that. And I want your listener or readers to know at Utah State that I care about their university and their future, and I want to support public higher education as well as K through 12 education with the resources that you need to succeed. Some of the things that I want to focus on is decreasing tuition and cost to make sure that our young students aren't going too far into student loan debt. I also am particularly concerned not just about public schools, but also there are a lot of private for-profit schools. I'm not talking about private schools like Brigham Young or Westminster. Right now I'm talking about the for-profit schools that have extremely high tuition. And I believe we need to have some more consumer safeguards and consumer protection for folks that go into those kind of schools to make sure that they're getting a good deal and they're not getting low quality education that doesn't provide them a satisfactory credential, but saddles them with years of student loan debt. Another thing that I'd like to mention that's I think especially relevant for Utah State, Utah State's long history as our state's agricultural school, I think is something to be really proud of. And I really believe in family farms and ranches. They're an important part of our state. I'm a guy that wants to fight for the little guy and gal and make sure that they're being treated fairly, and that includes family farmers and ranchers. So if I'm elected, I'm going to try to pursue a Future Farmers Success Act that would create student loan debt forgiveness for people that go to school, get a degree, and then decide to go take their skills back to a family farm or ranch. Just like, right now the federal government has a program that forgives student loans for people that go into public service jobs like teaching, firefighting, some attorney jobs as public defenders or prosecutors can get that student loan debt forgiveness. The people who are growing our food and are doing it out there, working every day to raise cattle or grow our crops, they're doing a real public service too. And I want to make sure that they have the same kind of student loan debt forgiveness that other public servants have.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
Thanks. I think we can pull that off. I believe that's something that I could do that crosses party lines. I think we could get bipartisan support for that. That's something I'd like to lead on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody wants food security.
Right.
Okay. Our next question is, what plans do you have to address racial justice and police reform issues?
Sure. This is a difficult time, a turbulent time in our country right now. A lot of people are hurting on both sides. So we need to start by level setting. I want the people who right now, especially Black and Indigenous and other people of color who sometimes don't feel like they are full participants in our society. I want them to know that I'm listening to them and that I care about them and I love them. And I want to be their governor too. And I want to make sure that they feel safe in their communities and that our police, sheriffs, and highway patrol are treating them with professionalism and courtesy and are protecting and serving them. So I want them to know that their lives matter to me. At the same time, I also know that a lot of folks in law enforcement right now are feeling pretty demoralized and are feeling like they're not appreciated because of the protests. And I want our folks in law enforcement to know that I believe in law enforcement, and I believe that the vast majority of our law enforcement officers are doing their best in difficult circumstances to try to be professional. But I also believe that law enforcement will be well served if we do adopt some reforms to try to make sure that we're moving forward as a society. And so what are some of the reforms that I think would be helpful for both police and also for various communities that don't feel safe or feel threatened? First off, I think that we need to make sure that our police officers are getting adequate mental health counseling and training on the job. When I've reached out and spoken with police officers, I was surprised to learn that oftentimes they will go and have to deal with very traumatic crime scenes. You know, I talked with a police officer who had to do the crime scene investigation for, a murder homicide with children involved. He got a day or so off, but then he was right back on the job trying to deal with that trauma. And many of our police officers need counseling, and they need anger management and grief therapy too, because they're people too. And so that's something that we should all be able to agree on. It's going to be easier for them to approach their jobs with professionalism, bright eyes, and an open heart if they've got the support that they need. Second, I think that we need to continue to try to look for ways to build conflict de-escalation into our local and state law enforcement policies and training to try to make sure that violence is only used as the last resort. Third, I think that we should encourage our police officers, like many other professionals in workplaces across the country, to continue to do implicit bias training to make sure that there aren't accidental or unintentional examples of discrimination or prejudicial behavior that's occurring. We have to do that at my university. I know that a lot of banks and other businesses are doing those same kind of trainings to try to overcome some of the difficult racial and gender challenges that we as a complicated, evolving society are facing. Our law enforcement need to make sure that they're doing the same kinds of things that other folks in the workplaces are too. Many of them are, and we need to continue to work on that and get better. Last, sometimes there are police officers who are white supremacists. I think it's quite rare, but it does happen. And if we find that there are police officers who are misusing their authority, then they need to be removed, because it's not okay for that. We, at our society, we are entitled to equal justice under the law. That's why the statues of justice are blind. Justice is not supposed to see or treat people of different colors differently. And if there are people in our law enforcement communities that are identified as engaging in unreasonable violence, then we need to have a database that keeps track of them, and they need to find a different place of employment and move on. And last thing I'll say is we need to have more community policing and community involvement in our policing to try to build trust, and also to help make the tough decisions about when police officers may have done something wrong and may need to be prosecuted and held accountable for their actions. That hopefully that doesn't happen, but it needs to happen if it's appropriate. Because just because you wear a badge, that doesn't mean that you get to shoot somebody when it's not justified. And I believe that all police officers out there of right mind agree with me on this point. So some challenging issues that we're facing in our society. Can I mention one more thing? One of the things that's causing this underlying tension, it's not just about policing, it's also about systemic inequality, where many people are struggling with economic despair because they're working jobs that, $9 an hour, they never can manage to get ahead. They don't even get access to health insurance or health care. They're struggling to even keep a roof over their head. And it's too easy for people to fall out of mainstream society into despair and into violence or drugs. And that can also create mental health challenges, mental illness. And it's exacerbating some of the challenges that we're seeing in policing, because we need to try to bring people together and have strong, vibrant communities where everybody has opportunities and ways to contribute to society and feel like they're included. I believe that my economic plans are more likely to be successful on that regard than my opponents.
Can you talk a little bit about those economic plans?
Sure, I'd love to. So first off, so many things I want to talk about. I'll leave healthcare off to the side. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about healthcare at some point. That's an important component of this. But let's just talk about jobs and consumer safeguards for a minute. So right now, Utah has had pretty low unemployment rates for a long time. Even with the coronavirus crisis, our job rate, unemployment rates are still relatively low in comparison to some other states. But the problem is that too many of those jobs out there are just that, jobs. They're not careers, the kind of jobs that you can actually build a family around and have a foundation, have enough money to pay off those student loans if you have them, to make sure you got access to healthcare and can afford to buy a home. Too many of folks in our state are working 2 or even 3 jobs sometimes and still don't have access to healthcare. I think that we need to have more good paying careers, and our policies at the state level need to encourage and facilitate that. So what are some of the things that we can do? First off, I think that we need to make sure that the Governor's Office of Economic Development and other branches of the state government are trying to help and encourage small businesses, which oftentimes create some of the greatest careers and entrepreneurialism. Second, I think that we need to try to remove some of the tricks and the traps, the pitfalls that exist in our society. I'll mention one, that's the payday loan industry. Did you know that the average interest rates on payday loans across our state is about 520%? That's more than twice what the New York City loan sharking syndicates charged back, the mob back in New York City in the 1960s. Too many families get stuck in that trap. They're looking for a quick way out, but end up getting stuck in long-term debt traps that make it difficult for them to save for retirement or take care of their families or have the courage to go on and start a new business. Those loans are counterproductive, and we need reform. A supermajority of Utahns agree with me on this about those payday loans. And last, we need to raise the minimum wage. In our state, the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. That's not reasonable. There are some people that at the bottom incomes that are still making that kind of money because they don't have any other alternatives. The best available evidence suggests that if you gradually raise that minimum wage and then peg it to inflation so it keeps pace with changes in society, that they're going to be, it's not just that they make a little bit more money, businesses do better too, because they have more customers that have a little bit of money in their pocket to go out to that restaurant, to go to the theater, to go buy something at a storefront retailer. It circulates as soon as people make that money in the low income side of our economy. So we're going to do better when everybody starts to do better. That means raising our minimum wage.
All right, thank you. Do you want to talk a little bit about the healthcare?
Sure. I guess we've already talked a bit about it. I think that we are not doing that well in our state, making sure that a large portion of our state has access to reliable and affordable health coverage. And it goes back to too many people are working jobs that where society is expected to take care of that family in the event that they get sick and they go to the emergency room and can't afford to pay for it. But for so many Utahns, even Utahns who have health insurance, they're only one accident or one surprising illness away from bankruptcy. And that's not right. Our insurance needs to be high quality insurance, and it needs to be expected that we're going to have widespread availability for it. Some of those challenges are at the federal level. I don't believe that the Affordable Care Act was a perfect solution, but it was called Romney Care before it was called Obamacare. And it was a pretty good strategy to try to increase affordability right now. And right now, there's not another alternative that the opposition party, the Republican Party, is putting on the table, even though they've promised that many times. I find it so distressing that my opponent and many of the leaders of our state and our dominant party are still, in the name of Utah, trying to join a lawsuit, trying to overturn people's access to health care through that Affordable Care Act. One important feature that I'll mention from that, before that law passed, insurance companies could deny people coverage because of pre-existing conditions. One example of something that will be a pre-existing condition if that lawsuit is successful in overturning that law, if all these people, millions of people and tens of thousands, soon to be, I suspect hundreds of thousands of Utahns that get the coronavirus, they could be denied health insurance because of that coronavirus if this lawsuit is successful. So at the same time that our leaders are not doing a great job stopping the spread of that virus, they're actively supporting a lawsuit that will make it okay for insurance companies to deny you healthcare coverage if you get the coronavirus and then have some medical complications from that, from scarring in your lungs or your heart going forward. That's not okay. I'm going to go the other direction. I'm going to try to expand healthcare, decrease the costs. If I could just mention a couple more things. Just because of a small budget shortfall, the state government has just is closing down 3 low-income health clinics in Ogden, Salt Lake, and Provo that are exactly the kind of clinics that we need to try to make sure that we're stopping and treating the spread of the coronavirus. I think that's the wrong direction to go. And then I'll also add, we need to do something about the high cost of prescription drugs. In Oregon and Washington, they've formed a consortium where public and private insurance providers are pooling their efforts to purchase prescription drugs at the lowest possible price in the marketplace, and then share it through all the different networks that they're caring for. Utah could follow suit in that. And the other thing they're doing is they're publishing the price that they're getting on a database. So consumers, when they get that when they get that prescription, when they fill it at the grocery store or the drugstore or at a hospital, they can check to see whether or not maybe they're being taken advantage of. That's a simple step that states are already adopting that's better than what we have here in Utah. Why are we not doing something like that? If I'm governor, that's the kind of practical compromise solution that I'll pursue to try to make lives better for ordinary working Utahns across this state.
Great, thank you. One more question. If you had to condense your platform into a tweet, what would it be?
Well, tweets are tricky. I think that what we need in our state is a more balanced, reasonable government that's listening to the public and is engaging, trying to find practical solutions to the pocketbook issues facing ordinary working Utahns. And I'll just give you, I know that I'm going past the tweet now, but can I just give you a couple of examples? In the last election, Utahns passed 3 ballot measures on expanding Medicaid. They're attempting to overturn that with that lawsuit that I'm talking about. Access to medical marijuana when a doctor says that it's advisable, and also the fair legislative redistricting, the Better Boundaries Initiative. The state legislature immediately, with the help of the Herbert Cox administration, passed laws that watered down all 3 of those ballot measures because they think that they know better than the public does. I think that all those ballot measures were better off just the way that the public voted for them. And I'm going to try to fight to protect those kind of ballot measures. One more example, we have difficulty generating enough revenue in our state to cover all the programs and services that we need. And so the state legislature and the Herbert Cox administration decided it was a good idea to triple the food taxes in our state. I would never have made that decision, and I will never support food taxes because I believe that we should be operating government to take care of those that have the least, that take care of the people who are struggling to get by. They need to be the priority. And look, I support and care about my friends and businesses that are doing well. Good for you. I support you and want you to succeed, and I'm proud of you. But it's not too much for us to ask that they're giving back just a little bit to take care of people who are coming up behind. And we don't want to go too far. We want to continue to have relatively low taxes if we can. But the way to solve our tax problems is not by taxing food that's going to fall hardest on low-income kids that are struggling to get the nutrition they need to grow, or starving college students that are struggling to get by and get an education on a limited budget, or our seniors who are on a fixed income, Social Security perhaps, and don't have enough money to splurge. Those are the people who food taxes aren't serving well. That's why I would have never supported that.
That's great. Is there anything else you would like to say to college students?
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job covering it. I guess I'm hoping that college students will, if I'll say one last thing on college students in particular, the election's coming up soon. And it's easy when you're busy as a college student and you're moving around to just not pay attention, and the election goes by before you know it. I'd encourage you to make a plan to vote right now. This is an incredibly important election, and we need young people who are coming up to take on these incredible challenges that we're facing. Things like the lack of access to affordable health care, a high cost of education, and especially that climate change issue. We need your leadership, and we need you to vote because in past years, too many college kids don't. And we need your support. And whether you vote for me or for my opponent, I certainly understand that. I think I'm offering the best option, but I want you to be politically engaged. I hope that you will.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for talking to the students, and I hope you have a great day.
You too, Kelly. It was nice to meet with you.